Good evening and welcome to Zion's Banner. It's thrilling to see the room already starting to fill up with some folks. Shout out to Nate. He's already got those things up there. And so you can see those. Those are always important because we have some new subscribers and we have new people occasionally pop in and out. Patreon has been exceedingly helpful for getting equipment and I'm getting even more advice about equipment from my son, who's into computers and continues to challenge dad with the better ways that things can be done technologically. So I continue to be a student on several levels. I missed you guys last week, and let me share why. I'm going to allow you to take a quick trip with me to California, as far as where I was last Thursday. So there's a picture there, but I actually have the clip, and there's a Jewish joke that I included in my dedication for my doctorate, which doesn't sound very Jewish because of the way the guy said it. So let me share the clip with you, see if you can catch the Jewish joke, and see if you can catch how you don't deliver a Jewish joke. But I wanted to share with you where I was Thursday and what I was up to.
This tribute is as follows. I'm so pleased that my Jewish dad can finally say, my son, the doctor. First, I thank the God of Abraham. I thank my wife and children for their incredible sacrifice. Special thanks goes to Pastor Brian Sturgeon. These are two churches that I want to give a special thanks to. Hillside Southern Baptist and Peru Conservative Grace Brethren Church. You all were the wind beneath my wings.
Okay, so hopefully you heard the Jewish joke in there. It didn't come out like Brooklyn, but that's where I was. That was the hooding ceremony. It had to be done through Zoom, and then commencement was actually live. So it became very real to me, not as though it was totally unreal, but that really reinforced things. It was a great time, and a lot of sacrifice and effort has gone into it, not just on my part, but the part of others. We are working on getting that dissertation up on Amazon, where it will be available, and it will be available to everyone, but we're working out how maybe to work with Patreon to make that available in a special way to those who give through Patreon, not because we don't love the others of you, but we thought that would be a neat thing to throw in. So we're working on all of that material. That's part of my learning curve. Next week, we want to continue with Melchizedek. And so we're going to look at the Second Temple period, and we're going to look at the Maccabees and the development of a Melchizedekian priesthood and how that fits in with the usage in Hebrews. And we touched on it, but I thought I'd dig a little deeper because I think there's great stuff there. So I'm going to move forward in our PowerPoint. We're going to be in Matthew tonight. Okay. And if you're wondering where we are at, let me bring up Logos Bible software. There we are. We are in Matthew 24, verse 36. You can see that in the English and the Greek. We will jump back there occasionally. I'm enjoying letting you see the text too. And tonight, everything is working out. So let me throw this up here, see, and add it to the stream. And there we are. Matthew 24, verse 36. It's on the PowerPoint, but we're going to deal with this first verse. And it creates an objection used by a lot of Jewish polemicists and Muslim polemicists. And so you can see it. But of that day, now Jesus is speaking about those end times that we've talked about, the temple and the Olivet discourse looking to Jesus's return. And just kind of the way he sort of bounces back and forth. And, you know, from an organized standpoint, it would have been great if he just divided it up and said, hi, here are these things. But remember, he's answering the disciples' questions in terms of the questions they would have at the day. And after saying that his words will by no means pass away. And again, I think that's a reference most likely to the immediate context and then referring to the context beyond. But I think he's highlighting The fact that the words that he's given about his return certainly will not pass away, even though I think that it extends beyond that. He wants the disciples to be very certain about what he's telling them because they want to know about the events related to the temple, being that they heard it was going to be destroyed again, and that's very bad news from their perspective, and then the kingdom, which they're very focused on. And so Jesus gets through with that. And then what you're going to see in the Greek is a contrastive, 36. And actually, it's not so contrastive. It's parade, and it's actually concerning. Okay. And it's used a lot in Corinthians. It's a natural divider. If Jesus wanted to contrast this stronger, he would have used a different Greek word. So in terms of his words passing away, then he says, concerning the day and the hour, no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, but the Father only, which, by the way, excludes him knowing. And this is where our problem begins to develop as far as apologetics. So let me throw the PowerPoint back up there and say, why didn't Jesus know the time? What is going on here? And then after this, there are several parables of watchfulness. Now, we're not going to get far into those parables this week. That will await next week. But the shocking thing is nobody knows the hour and day. So if someone tells you they know when Jesus is returning, guess what? They don't know. Let me be real clear about that. They don't know. They can't know because nobody, not even the angels in heaven, know. But at this point, when Jesus says this would indicate that he didn't know. And so let's see where this is a problem. And I'm going to remove a little bit of branding here because my branding right now does not help us see the question that is being asked by Bridget, which is, why didn't Jesus know the time? I mean, doesn't he know everything? Isn't he God? What do we do with this? And this is why this is often used as an argument against Jesus's deity by Jewish polemicists and Muslim polemicists. Now, in the case of Jewish polemicists, they are not arguing he is the Christ, the Messiah, but not God. They're arguing this is a clear contradiction with the Christian claim that Jesus is indeed God come in the flesh. And so you Christians, again, are being really weird and troublesome, and obviously you're crazy. You know, that's kind of the nice way of putting that. But, you know, obviously you have a problem there. Hey, shout out to Nate. I love it when people greet people. So there you go. You're right on the mark. And so you can kind of see the way the argument works. Premise one is God is omniscient, therefore he knows all things. Premise two, Jesus did not know certain things. The conclusion that they want you to draw is Jesus is not God. And so you can see why this is a problematic thing. We're going to see why this is the case and how we answer this and why Jesus didn't know. So that ought to be interesting stuff. Let's deal with it. There's a problem with this reasoning here. Jesus has done something or something has occurred in the incarnation. That's a better way to put it. If Jesus could know all things but laid aside conscious knowledge of certain facts in order to become fully man and fully God, then the conclusion does not logically follow, because Jesus shared omniscience with the Father but limited it voluntarily. Now, this is an important part of Christian theology. The kenosis is integral to understanding the incarnation and the way this all works. And so what we are saying here is that Jesus made a decision in being incarnated to lay aside the use of that omniscience and thus limit it. And he could do so in order to become fully God and fully man. Okay? Now, let's talk about incarnational theology. And interestingly enough, I'm going to be in on my friend Brian Crawford's dissertation project, where he's going to discuss the objections to the incarnation from a Jewish standpoint, dealing with Hasidic theology, which includes some of the stuff we've discussed about Maimonides, but also will give me more information. And hopefully, Lord willing, I will be able to break that down and share with you what that's meant to me. The incarnation is absolutely key. And so what are we talking about when we mean the incarnation? That may sound obvious, but what you're going to see is there were several heresies related to the early church, because this wasn't so understandable to everybody. We're going to look at some of the Jewish problems with this right around the time of the early church, and we're going to deal with some of the Greek problems. It's a historic Christian doctrine. This is one of those essentials that you cannot get away from. Now, there was a big controversy about this in terms of, is Jesus' sonship eternal or not eternal? This became a big thing even in Christian circles around some issues which are rephrased as the eternal sonship of Jesus. When we talk about this, we talk about him being the eternal second person of the Trinity, which we refer to as God the Son. This has to do with the roles in the Trinity, not the fact of Jesus being a created being in any way, which is hard for Jews and Muslims to understand, which he had in time taken upon himself a complete human nature, being born of the Virgin Mary. Complete human nature is very key. By the power of the Holy Spirit, the doctrine of the incarnation teaches that through the work of the Holy Spirit, God the Son became fully human in time in order to die for the sins of humanity and defeat death by the power of his resurrection. Although New Testament doctrines uniformly affirm that Jesus is God in the flesh, certain books of the Bible emphasize it more than others. Now, this is just an article on the incarnation in Lexham's Survey of Theology, part of Logos Bible Software, which is very useful. We believe something that's incredibly powerful and yet hard to grasp, and very important to keep balanced as we look at the challenges to the incarnation, which ended up occurring. So there are detractors nowadays that want to use the argument you've seen, but there were early problems with the incarnation. Now, one of them you may be less familiar with. The Ebionites were a sect that came, they were Jewish. Okay, they were not a Greek dealing with the incarnation. They were early Jewish believers. This is what's so ironic. Early Jewish believers were the first ones to believe in the incarnation. And the Ebionites were a heretical sect that formed in the early Jewish church before it had grown and had a larger Gentile contingent to it. They claimed, and they continued to be around, by the way, but they're a particularly, shall we say, they're particularly Jewish heresy within Christianity, that Jesus was a mere human being and therefore not God. Now, this is a Jewish challenge to this, and I want to go ahead and talk a little bit more about this group, because I think some of their ideas are still floating around. There isn't much known about their founder. The church fathers respond to them. Unfortunately, they kind of respond a little bit more blanket than they needed to respond. And you have a large article here. Now, I've been told that it's hard to track large pieces of text, so let me break it down. The church fathers attack this particular position. Now, the Ebionites state that the law of Moses hadn't changed, that Jesus was merely human. And you can see kind of where this is going. They repudiated Paul, but they liked James. Whenever anybody starts repudiating Paul, I get a little nervous about this. And you'll notice that Jewish polemicists spend a lot of time attacking Paul. The Christology of Paul is not something new, something added. It's a distillation and application of the ramifications of the Christology that the scriptures themselves portray. And they basically, there are two ways to interpret their name. It could be connected to the Hebrew word poor, and that could be a reference to them being humble in their own minds, like we are the humble ones, or poor economically. The other interpretation of the Hebrew this may come from means pious, because of their affinity for the continued, unchanged, unaltered authority of the Mosaic covenant as it existed in its understanding and practice during the Second Temple period. My concern is that there are portions of the Messianic Jewish community that come very close to what I would call Ebionism. And really, in some books, there is a distinguishing between the Nazarene followers of Jesus that were orthodox in their doctrine. In other words, they maintained sound doctrine, and the Ebionite heresy. What I want you to see is they were a type of Jewish sect because Christianity at the time was considered part of Judaism. So they were a heretical branch off the Jewish church. And the material, of course, comes from the Lexham Bible Dictionary. But the concern is that some of those sorts of thinking even occurs today. Okay? As far as challenges today, there are problems with Kabbalistic thinking in the incarnation, and the incarnation is disallowed under post-Maimonidean Judaism. So this is one of the reasons I would be regarded as apostate by folks like Rabbi Singer. Now, let me give you the Maimonidean article of faith that becomes wedded to Judaism, inculcated, cemented in. Judaism becomes post-Maimonidean. I believe that the Creator, blessed be his name, is not a body and has no corporeal relations applied to him, that there exists nothing that is in any way similar to him. Now, this article is designed by Maimonides to basically cement an anti-incarnational stance in Judaism. And so Maimonides did not even like speech in which God was given characteristics that are common to us as image bearers. He thought all of that was junk. Nachmanides did not necessarily agree with all of that. And by the way, I'm not going to pull the book out, but there is discussion in the Talmud about God wearing phylacteries. So Maimonides basically puts an end to any allowance for this type of thinking. And that's Singer in a Jewish Encyclopedia. I'm quoting the 13 articles from that source. They may word a little differently in other sources. Now, there were challenges on the Greek side. Now, understand the way Greek thinking was influenced. It was highly influenced by Plato. Now, Plato regarded matter as less good. Okay, what was really good was the spiritual, the immaterial. The world of ideas was the real thing. And then you had things that weren't so good. And then you have Neoplatonism, and you eventually end up with Marcionism that ends up coming in. But early in the 2nd century, Christians were faced with the challenge of Docetism, or Docetic heresy, which claimed that Jesus was fully God and only appeared to be human. Jesus wasn't really human. He never took on a human nature. He appeared to be human. He was not God come in the flesh, but rather he was simply apparent. And it comes from the Greek word for appear. This was a real heresy that rocked the church early on, and it had to be combated. Now, some of this early Gnostic Docetism is what John is referring to in 1 John. If anyone says that Jesus is not God come in the flesh, he is a liar. If anyone does not have the Son, he does not have the Father. There's a lot of language in 1 John that is specifically designed to deal with Docetism. which was connected to Gnostic thinking. So when you see the Gnostic Gospels and some of that stuff, you're dealing with that sort of thinking that was an early problematic heresy. Now, the First Council in Nicaea did some very bad things in separating. Sorry about that. We jumped. Okay. Did some, whoa. I don't know why that did that. So I'm going to quickly jump here. Okay. And see what we have here. Okay. And I'm going to go back from there every so often. So John is written to deal with Docetism, which is a real problem at the time. Now, the Council of Nicaea, again, had some really bad stuff to it. The Jewish bishops deliberately had their invitations get lost in the mail. There was a separating of Easter from Passover, but Paul's very clear, Christ our Passover has been sacrificed for us. There was some real separation that was done at this council in connection with Constantine that were horrible and pulled the church away, and really the Jewish roots of the faith were obscured at best. But it dealt with some real heresies. Now, Arius, when you meet a Jehovah's Witness, you're meeting an Arian. It's a very old heresy. Now, Arius believed that Jesus was a created being, okay? And so you deal with Arianism and you deal with Epipolianism, which is different. Okay, there were two councils. There was a further second council related to the Council of Nicaea. Sometimes you hear what's the Nicene Constantinopolitan Nicene Creed. They affirmed, because of the heresy of Apollonius, that Jesus was fully human. Okay. You had adoptionism, which was the idea that Jesus was merely human, but was adopted by God, which is around. And so that was an early heresy. All of these heresies basically negated the idea that Jesus had both a human and a divine nature at the same time. Eventually, you have a council that settles this and comes up with a creed that Jesus has both natures. They are not confused, and I could probably go to the exact creed, but the bottom line was to preserve the idea that there were two separate natures, and Jesus took upon himself a human nature, being the Son divine. Okay? Now, where this gets very important is I remember being on the Apologetics conversational website when Chosen People still had it. And one of the arguments that was up there was that God is immutable. Therefore, if God took upon a human nature, he ceased to be immutable because he changed. Therefore, his immutability prevents that from being true, essentially. Because he now has a change in his nature. What I pointed out was, in addition to his divine nature, he took on a human nature. So his divine nature was not changed, and so his immutability was not jeopardized. But here's the thing about human beings. We don't know everything. If he took on a human nature, human beings being creatures, it makes sense that there are certain things Jesus would not have had conscious access to. Notice I use the term conscious access. It's not as though he didn't know them. He did not have access to the information. You say, how does that work? Well, let me give you an example from human nature. From what we understand about the human brain, we store every memory, but we lose access to certain memories. So when you forget something, it's not that the memory isn't in there. You've lost access to where it is. It's sort of like with a computer losing access to the file location. Now, that's what they think they happen. New neural patterns are written, things are written over, and access to the information is lost. And so that's why I use conscious access. Jesus laid aside or did not know certain things because his conscious access to those things was temporarily limited. And this is a function of his creaturehood. If he was omniscient and he had total conscious, volitional, or free access to all of that knowledge, he would cease to have had a human experience, because we in human experience do not know everything. We do learn, and the scriptures are clear that he grew in wisdom and grace with man and God. And so for us to progress and to grow and to change requires that we have new knowledge and new understanding where there was not understanding before. And so Jesus could not be human, fully human, and have full human experience if he was experiencing omniscience during his earthly life in an unresurrected body. This is a problem with Mormonism. We don't become gods. We remain creatures. And there's something about creaturely experience that will always make us different from God. And we talk about how that works, but there are certain attributes that we will never, ever share with God. We will not share omnipresence. We will not share omniscience. We will not share omnipotence. We will never have those qualities. They're often referred to as the attributes of greatness, and human beings will never have those qualities. So Mormonism makes a mistake. They have human beings becoming God. We do not become God. We become image bearers of God, unhindered and untarnished, the way we were supposed to be. So if a Mormon knocks at your door, say, you know what, there are some serious problems with your theology. By the way, a few of them stem around the priesthood of Melchizedek. So the stuff on the priesthood of Melchizedek is totally good for Mormons too. Okay, let's talk about one of the most important doctrines, but least taught and understood. I don't hear Philippians exposited much from the pulpit, but every Christian needs to understand what's called the kenosis. This is ground level stuff, and it's so important for apologetics, because I go back to this with Muslims and say, you need to understand what we're saying and what we're not saying. And I have to do it with Jewish people too. They'll say things like, well, so you believe that a man became God. No, that's not what we believe. We believe in the kenosis. This is the idea. It comes from the Greek word to empty. Okay, and I'm going to take you there. And this is major doctrine. It's kind of Doctrine 101. Okay. And John Williams is here. Thank you, John. He's throwing up a Bible verse. I can count on John to throw up additional scriptural material. So that's good. I'm going to go to Philippians and give you the background here. This is what's called the kenosis. It's the emptying. It comes from that Greek word. I should be able to highlight, okay. He made himself of no reputation. There's the Greek word highlighted. And can I bring up the Greek word? There it is. Okay. Kenosis, kenao. Okay. And it has the idea of emptying. Now, you're going to see it. The English translation is he made himself of no reputation. A better way to understand it is he emptied himself. Now, the background is Paul isn't just teaching doctrine for doctrine's sake. I mean, just to give people big heads, okay? There are practical implications to doctrine. Sound apologetics is based on sound theology. Sound Christian practice is based on sound theology. You cannot have sound Christian practice apart from sound theology, and you cannot have sound apologetics apart from sound theology. I went out with a dear sister, no exposures on her, who said the gospel matters, theology doesn't matter. Well, you can't have sound understanding and proclamation of the gospel without theology. Okay, if anyone tells me they can separate their evangelism from theology, you're not understanding evangelism and you're not understanding theology. Okay? The background is these two women were fighting, and they were dividing the church. Paul didn't want a divided church. He didn't think it was God honoring. And so he appeals to some Christians to help these two gals kind of make peace and get along with each other. And in the process of this, he is teaching us how we are to live. And so he says, let this mind be in you. Now, that's not the brain, that's the mindset, which was in Christ Jesus. So you need to have the same attitude. That's what mind is, attitude. And then he begins to explain the kenosis, who being in the form of God, it doesn't mean he just appeared to be God. I know morphos used and morphe, but it's literally being God. You can't be in the form of God without being God. Did not consider it robbery to be equal with God, which, by the way, it is robbery to be equal with God. It's blasphemy. If you're not God, to make yourself equal to God. So if Jesus was not God come in the flesh, he would have been committing blasphemy. A shout out to Elizabeth, our sister from down under. Glad to have her with us. And so he emptied himself. And so what we have here is he lays aside the independent use of his attributes of greatness. Now, why did I say that? That is a textbook. That was the proper answer when I first took my ordination exam. Okay? If someone said to you, what did Jesus do? In becoming a human being, he took on a human nature fully, and he emptied himself of the independent use of his attributes of greatness. Now, the attributes of greatness are the omnis. Okay? It's a quick way to remember them. Omni, which means all. Yeah, he laid aside the independent use of his all-knowingness. That's why he could temporarily not know. He laid aside the independent use of his omnipotence. That's why he could be arrested. He laid aside the independent use of his omnipresence. That's why he was with the disciples at one place at one time. He laid that aside, which, by the way, means he was dependent upon the Father and the Spirit, just like you and I are, in the sense of being dependent on God. In other words, he experienced creaturely dependence as God. And so he needed to have the Spirit do certain things because he had voluntarily laid those things apart. And that's why we seek to be like him as image bearers, because in doing so, he gave us the perfect image of what an image bearer ought to be. Okay, now that's your basic lesson on the kenosis. Okay, now let's see where this fits in. I keep going to the wrong one. I'm sorry about that. Okay, but he laid aside those independent omnis. And I'm going to go back to our section here because it's best you deal with it. That's why he didn't know. So it doesn't prove he wasn't God. It proves that he limited himself as God to experience humanity and take on a full human nature. Okay, and that is theology 101. That is basic Christology. And so that's where we're at there. Understand that that's what we're dealing with when we talk about the kenosis. So I say to my Muslim friend, no, Jesus is God, but he took upon a human nature and temporarily chose not to know the hour. Now, I think he knows the hour now that the Father has set. And it is so good to have Jimmy here. So she's throwing up Hebrews. This fits in perfectly with Hebrews. By the way, last week's Melchizedek thing fit in really well with Hebrews. And this week, we'll be talking about the background of a non-Levitical priesthood and the fact that that idea became part of Second Temple Judaism due to the Maccabees. So that's a teaser. to come back again as I get myself in order and get back into preparing materials and Sunday school and start to think about an outreach schedule for the summer, because we don't just do apologetics, talk about apologetics. We go out in the streets and do apologetics. I am a practitioner. Let's talk about the sign of Noah. Where does the sign of Noah come in? What is the sign of Noah and why do we care? Well, let's go here. Okay, the minute he finishes his comment, he goes, but as in the days of Noah, oh, well, we made a jump here, okay? But as in the days of Noah, also will be the coming of the Son of Man, or will the coming of the Son of Man be? So now we've jumped here, and Jesus immediately starts bringing up Noah. What's this Noah thing? Let's just keep going with the PowerPoint here and see what Jesus is doing. Okay. He is going to reference the incident with Noah. In fact, he's going to do some subscription here. I'm jumping a little bit. That's okay. In the days before the flood. So it's pre-flood Noah. Okay. We want to be careful here because Noah does exist after the flood here. But Jesus is talking about this as an illustration. In the days before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and given in marriage until the day Noah entered the ark and did not know the flood came and took them all away. So also will be the coming of the Son of Man. And of course, it doesn't stop there, right? There will be two in the field. One will be taken and the other left. There were two women be grinding at the mill. One will be taken and the other will be left. There's our other. Therefore, you do not know the hour your Lord is coming. And so he's going to use this, okay, as an illustration. And so he's using the days of Noah as an illustration, but an illustration of what? How is this to be understood? Well, I'm so glad you asked. These verses are often misunderstood. Now, I hear these verses used all the time in ways they ought not to be used. One of these positions is what I call the pre-wrath rapture, and I'm going to let you know that I'm not a pre-wrath kind of guy, because I think that everything that happens during that period of time seems really to be God's wrath. When I look at the way God judges nations, the plagues and the situations there fit very much with the way God judges the nations. And so I'm going to say, whether you are pre-wrath or not, do not go to this verse. Okay, we can have a discussion about pre-wrath, but don't go here. And I'm going to share why you do not use this verse this way. Okay, so I always tell you what the trip is, and then you can take it or not take it, but I also tell you how not to get there. And why I think this is a really bad road, even if you want this doctrine. So let's see why I don't buy this road. Okay. The days of Noah were, and there's the whole section. By the way, I want you to see the main point of the section. What is the point of the section? Watch therefore. That's going to lead us to our parables. Okay. Shout out to Slam RN. I'm glad she could make it on the show tonight. And I hope you were sidetracked by something pleasant, because who wants to be sidetracked by something unpleasant? The reason the parables are going to follow up is that the point is watch therefore. Okay, so Jesus is not teaching with no purpose. He's telling them to be watching. Should we be watching for the Lord's coming? Yes. Should we be speculating as to which day and which hour I pack my bags? No. But we should be watching. He's going to go ahead. He's going to bring up Noah. And he uses two examples in relationship to Noah. Okay? And then these examples come off of the relationship so that we understand what's going on. Okay? Now, the way this is sometimes taken, the idea is that the beginning verses are the tribulation. One is taken and another is left. And so one is taken in the tribulation in the middle of this period, and hence we have the pre-wrath position. Now, again, I have a problem with that road. That road is washed out. You can't use it. Okay? This particular scripture is taken to mean that the beginning rapture stuff happens, and then one is taken and the other is left or raptured. And this leads to what's called a mid-trib or pre-wrath view. Now, there is a little difference between the mid-trib and the pre-wrath, exactly in the timing. Now, Marv Rosenthal, who was originally with the Jewish Missions Board, founded Zion's Banner on the basis of this very thing. And I would say to Marv, no matter what you think, I'm not going to go there. Okay, now let's talk about the simile being used here. When something is like something, you have to figure out how it's like the thing it's like. What is the common feature between the days of Noah and a woman going to the mill and one being taken and one being left? Because whatever the common element is determines as to how you're to understand the illustrations given. So in the days of Noah, in the context, in the days of Noah, the one that was taken was not the one in the ark. They were the ones that were left. See, in Noah's day, everyone else was taken and Noah was left. So that's the essence and foundation of the illustration. And that determines what taken is and what left is. Taken in Noah's day meant taken in judgment. See, if you were taken when the ark came, you died in the flood. If you were left, you were inside the ark and you were safe. So when we look at the word taken in this section, we have to understand it as taken as people were taken in the days of Noah, which meant taken in judgment and were no more. They died. They drowned. That's the way they were taken. They were judged. And the ones that were left were indeed the faithful ones. This does not fit in with the rapture. Because if you postulate a rapture at all, it is the faithful that are taken, and the unsaved, whether presently or permanently, because I believe that the rapture is also a time of great revival, the unsaved that are left. But in Noah's day, the taken were judged, and the left were the righteous. So you cannot use this verse this way because the context doesn't allow you to use the verse this way. And so when people use this verse this way, they are misusing the verse. Okay? The point of this entire section of Scripture, and the reason that Jesus is going to give 3 entire parables about being ready, is that this section of Scripture indicates that readiness is a demand, is demanded of a disciple. In other words, the disciple is responsible to be ready. And Jesus is going to give 3 parables to further emphasize the fact that the disciple is expected to be ready. So see, if you're a disciple, you are expected to practice vigilance. Now, let me give you an example. Guards were set, and if you fell asleep at your post, you were a bad guard. It was a dereliction of duty to fall asleep at your post. And for the disciple, to fall asleep at your post is a dereliction of duty. You are being a bad disciple. You are expected to stay in a state of readiness. Now, why do we not do that? We don't do that because of distractions and tiredness. Why would a guard fall asleep? Because he has become sleepy and tired, and he has taken his mind off of what it needs to be on, and he has dozed off, or he has become distracted. Oh, look over there. And so that's basically what ends up happening. And so why would that happen to us? It would happen to us because we have become dulled or distracted. How's that for a nice sermon alliteration? Dulled or distracted. And if we become dulled or distracted, we end up practicing dereliction. Wow, I've got a nice Baptist 3-point sermon right there. If you become dulled or distracted, you practice dereliction. And so we are not to do that. And so Jesus, in telling these disciples about the end time events, stresses to them the need for a constant state of readiness, which is exactly what we still need today. We complain about the state of the world, but the state of the world is not our primary concern. Our primary concern is the state of the kingdom's expansion. We do good in the world to magnify God, to demonstrate his love, beauty, and justice. We do not do good in the world to save the world. Okay? God is the one who saves the world. So this is why I do not obsess with virtue signaling and all this other stuff, because the world is not mine to save. But I do not want to practice dereliction. So I know we're ending a little early, but that's okay. There's room for questions, answers, comments, and other things, which everybody who watches this after this gets to enjoy. So that's kind of fun too. But the true disciple keeps his or her post. So what's your post? What territory has God given you as a sphere of influence or an area that you need to be working? Whatever that post is, determine it. It may change. The king can reassign his soldiers, but you need to keep your post. Figure out what your post is and keep it. That can include your family, that can include your work, that can include your ministry, that can include any number of things. So if you're a Sunday school teacher, keep your post. If that includes having a family, keep your post. But keep your post and understand that the day is coming. Be ready and do not fall asleep on the job. Now, that's your take-home truth. And so, it seems simple. The joke is the devil is in the details, right? But that is what we're to do. The parables, we will go through how Jesus illustrates this to his disciples, what he wants them to know, some of those illustrations, and the reinforcement of the idea, and maybe why they needed not to get distracted and keep their post. So let's go through here. I'm glad that people got a lot out of the incarnation. I'm going to put okay, and I'm going to go here. Wow, let's remove there. There we are. Yeah. All right, I'm glad. Great response to the video on Melchizedek. Some comments here. John Williams was talking about a Greek verb that he wanted us to know, poured out like a drink offering, in terms of probably Paul. And so he stuck the Greek up there a little close to the English, but it's there as a libation. And he jumped to Genesis. I'm not always getting the connections here. I like the verses. I just don't always know how they relate. I don't see any other questions. So my son is in town, so I think I'm going to enjoy a little family time. Next week, we'll talk more about how the Maccabees could not have been Jewish heroes if there had not been a Melchizedekian priesthood, and how they invoke the idea of Psalm 110 in Jewish history as a Jewish source, in terms of Jewish sources, as Jewish people. And the writer of Hebrews is piggybacking on what's going on at the time. If you did not see the last video on Hebrews, I would encourage you to go back and see it, hear the distractor, and hear the video. Glad that Slam RN was able to be there, and I'm always thrilled. Thank you, folks, for being here. And I'm going to do the good night unless there's anything else. There is a comment about he was a Levite, not a Aaronic priesthood. So I'm not quite sure. Thank you, Brother Steve. By the way, before I go, I have something I have to do. First of all, thank you to all who support us through Chosen People Ministries. We are Zion's Banner, but we are Zion's Banner connected to Chosen People. 2 Patreons, you know. And there are 2 T's in supports in one of those places, but that's because you are great supporters. So I'm going to go ahead and, there's a new comment there. Okay, excellent. I have no idea where this place is, but I know it's around. So have a good time with family. And I'm going to Erev Tov. Thank you all for being here. I will see you next week. Okay. I'm sorry about that. I will see what I can do to make that work correctly. But I am so thrilled to have you aboard. So, and an Erev Tov to all of you. Which, by the way, for any visitors, that means good evening. And for some of you, it's good night. It's Lila Tov, but I want to wish you all a good evening or good night. And I will see you soon. For prayer warriors, be praying as I try to start working outreach in the summer here. So, blessings and see you all soon.